My mother was the long-lost daughter of the Fu family, but sadly, by the time they found her, it was too late. That woman with her noble blood lay peacefully in the barren yellow soil of northwest China, the impoverished land that had nurtured her throughout her life. She lay there, serene, as if in a deep sleep, oblivious to the wind and sand that silently swept across the desolate hills. The day my maternal grandfather arrived, the sky was a dull gray, covered in dust. I stood before my mother's grave, watching the man in the black woolen coat step out of a gleaming luxury car. He stood in that impoverished countryside like someone from another world. His clean, polished leather shoes stepped on the cracked earth, a stark contrast to the surrounding landscape. He stood before the tombstone for so long that the wind had spread a thin layer of dust on his shoulders. Finally, he turned to look at me, his eyes deep and cold like a winter lake. "Do you want to come with me?" I nodded slightly, replying in a very low voice, "Yes." Perhaps he thought I wanted to be reunited with my family, to return to the life of wealth my mother had lost. But that wasn't the case. Since I was little, my mother had often held me close, pointing to pictures in my textbooks and softly saying that the world outside was vast. She told me I absolutely had to go out and see it, for her and for my maternal grandfather. The Fu family wasn't just family to me, but a high, sturdy bridge, strong enough for me to reach my future. I wanted to study at the best school, read the best books, and see the world my mother never got to see. The journey back to the city was long and suffocating. My grandfather sat beside me, his back straight, not saying a word from beginning to end. I was silent too, almost pressing my face against the car window, greedily gazing at the scenery outside. Wide, sprawling roads stretched endlessly, their dazzling lights appearing to go on forever. The traffic was congested, the billboards were dazzlingly bright. All of it made my head spin. This world was completely different from my windy, sandy Northwest. It was so vast, so prosperous, like a dream my mother used to talk about on those bitterly cold winter nights. The car finally stopped in front of a heavily guarded security gate. After driving down a eerily quiet, tree-lined road, it slowly came to a halt in front of a magnificent white mansion, like a palace. I had never seen anything so luxurious, not even on television. Many people were already waiting outside. Leading the group was an elderly woman in a dark blue cheongsam, her hair neatly tied up, her eyes red and swollen as if she had been crying for a long time. That was my grandmother. Beside her was my uncle, Fong Yi-sun, a middle-aged man in a neat suit with a stern, unapproachable demeanor. Behind him was a tall, thin young man with chestnut hair and a lazy, disdainful look in his eyes. My cousin, Fa Van Bach. There was also a woman standing next to my grandmother, elegant and refined, in her early 40s, every gesture exuding the sophistication of someone who had lived a life of luxury. Her gaze at me held a mixture of curiosity and pity. Later I learned that she was Fu Yining, the woman who had raised my mother in the guise of the Fu family's daughter. Standing beside her was her daughter Yu Yungsha, the same age as me, dressed beautifully like a little princess. But her gaze at me was full of undisguised disgust. She looked from my worn-out sneakers down to my faded pants, and then to my dry, wind-damaged hair. "Is this your daughter? Her name is Si-man, right?" She must have had a hard journey. Fu Yining spoke first, her voice so gentle and soft it was almost perfect. My grandmother seemed to snap out of her daze, trembling as she came forward to hug me. "My child, my granddaughter, you've suffered so much all these years." She reached out to take my hand, but I instinctively took a step back. My hands were rough from working in the fields, my palms calloused, and my fingernails still had dirt clinging to them. Her hands were so white and soft that I was afraid I might hurt her. My grandmother's hand froze in midair. The sadness on her face momentarily solidified into an indescribable awkwardness. My grandfather seemed oblivious to the scene. He merely uttered a cold remark before walking straight inside. "What are you doing standing out there? Come in." The living room was so spacious I didn't know where to look. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden light onto the thick, soft carpet. The maid silently brought tea. The teacup was so transparent I didn't dare touch it roughly. fearing that a single misstep might shatter something incredibly precious. My uncle sat down on the sofa opposite me, lit a cigarette, and looked at me with a scrutinizing gaze. "How old are you? Where do you study? What are your grades?" 17. I'm in 11th grade in town. Academic performance? Decent, I answered briefly, lowering my head. In this small school in the Northwest, being at the top of my class wasn't something to be proud of. But in their eyes, perhaps that achievement wasn't even worth mentioning. "What do you mean by temporarily?" "Top of the class." Fu Wenbei immediately scoffed. "Top in the town? She'll probably drop to the bottom of the rankings here. Our school is a national key school." Yu Youngsha leaned close to her mother and whispered, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mom, look at her shoes and her pants. They seem to smell." Fu Yining gently patted her daughter's hand, feigning reproach. "Yunxia, don't talk nonsense. Seaman just came from the countryside. It's normal for her to be dusty from the long journey." Then she turned to me, smiling gently. "If you need anything later, just tell your aunt." Aunt. That way of addressing me felt incredibly strange. My grandmother still looked at me with a pained expression. So similar, really very similar. Meanwhile, my grandfather sat in the armchair reserved for the host, holding a newspaper, not saying another word from beginning to end. Occasionally, his gaze would fall on me, but it wasn't like a grandfather looking at his granddaughter. It was more like assessing the value of a lost item that had been found after many years. I sat up straight, letting them observe me. I knew I resembled my mother, especially my eyes. Perhaps that resemblance was the only thing that allowed me to enter this house. My first dinner at the Fu family's house made me realize just how vast the distance between myself and this place was. The long dining table was covered with a pristine white tablecloth, laden with exquisite dishes I'd never heard of. The soft yellow light reflected off the glass cups and the cold silver cutlery, making everything look more like a drama-like banquet than a family meal. I sat at the end of the table, silently observing everyone and mimicking their use of knives and forks. The pan-fried fish was so tender it melted on my tongue, yet I could barely taste it. The atmosphere around the table was so quiet that I could only hear the sound of the knife and fork clinking against the porcelain plate. Yu Youngsha rested her chin on her hand, a malicious smile playing on her lips. "Sister Seaman, did you fly here?" I looked up at her. "Yes." "First time?" "Yes." Her eyes widened instantly, as if she'd just heard something incredibly strange. "Wow, really? Have you ever ridden a bullet train?" I shook my head. "What about the subway?" "No." Yu Youngsha burst out laughing. "Oh my God, you've never even ridden the subway? You're such a country bumpkin." Haha. The entire table fell silent. Fu Wenbei lowered his head, his shoulders trembling slightly, clearly trying to suppress his laughter. Fu Yining frowned slightly, feigning a few perfunctory reprimands to her daughter. Grandma opened her mouth to say something, but when she looked at Grandpa, who was sitting silently at the head of the table, she slowly fell silent. I put down my chopsticks and looked directly at Yu Youngsha. "Have you ever seen soil?" The smile on her face froze. "Who hasn't seen soil?" "Not the kind of soil in parks or flower beds?" I calmly continued. "It's the kind of soil that cracks open in the summer sun and turns into mud in the rainy season, teeming with insects and rat burrows. Have you ever seen it?" Yu Youngsha was speechless. I continued to look at her, my voice strangely calm. "Do you know how potatoes grow?" "Not the kind you buy in the supermarket, but the kind you dig up with a hoe and turn over, each tuber still covered in mud." "Have you ever seen people harvesting barley on a mountainside?" "Have you ever seen cow dung drying in the yard?" "Have you ever slept on a mud bed heated by dried dung in a winter of -10 degrees?" I asked each question slowly but sharply, like a thin blade. Yu Youngsha's face turned from red to pale. Her lips moved, but she couldn't utter a word. The people around us fell silent. Even my grandfather put down his newspaper, looking at me for the first time. "I know all of that," I said softly, "because Northwest China is my home." I glanced around the large dining table. There's no subway, no bullet train, and certainly no airplanes there. Only trucks carrying wheat, potatoes, and vegetables from that land, and finally appearing on your dinner tables. The atmosphere grew increasingly heavy. So what's so funny about never having ridden a subway? I looked directly at Yu Yung Sha. At least I know where the food I eat comes from. After saying that, I lowered my head and continued eating the now cold fish. No one said another word. My grandfather looked at me for a long time. His gaze was no longer completely indifferent as before, but mixed with something indescribable, like astonishment, like the first time he truly saw his granddaughter. From that day on, the attitude of everyone in the house began to subtly change. My uncle would occasionally ask me a few questions about my studies. Although Fa Van Bach remained outwardly indifferent, he no longer openly mocked me. Only Fa Nhi Nin became increasingly sensitive. Whenever anyone mentioned my studies, she would immediately steer the conversation towards Zhu Van Ha. She'd talk about how the girl had just learned a new piano piece, how her dance teacher praised her talent, and how she had excellent social skills. I didn't understand what she was worried about, and I didn't bother thinking about it, because my world, from beginning to end, revolved around books. The Fu family's house was merely a temporary residence for me. I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to study, to get into the best university, to escape the narrow confines of that northwest mountainous region. The power struggles within this mansion had nothing to do with me. On enrollment day, the school assigned me to class 20, a regular class. Fu Wenbei and Yu Yung Xia, of course, were in the most prestigious elite class. News about me quickly spread throughout the school. A female student who transferred from a poor mountainous region in the northwest, dressed simply, and reportedly a distant relative of the Fu family who had recently reunited with them. To these students who grew up in the bustling city, I was like a new joke. Yu Yung Xia certainly didn't miss the opportunity. She and her group of friends quickly made me a target of public bullying. Every time I went to the library, they would deliberately take all the seats and laugh mockingly as I left with my books. When I went to the cafeteria, someone would accidentally bump into me and knock over my lunch tray. One day, I walked into class and found my desk covered in filthy words written in felt-tip pen. "Country bumpkin!" A wild chicken trying to become a phoenix. "Go back to the mountains!" echoed throughout the classroom. I just silently wiped my desk clean with a cloth and sat down to do my homework as if I hadn't seen anything. Yu Yung Sha once stood in front of me and deliberately asked loudly, "Hey, you don't even know how to fight back when you get insulted like that." I didn't even look up. It wasn't that I was afraid. It's just that I really didn't have time to pay attention to them. These acts of bullying are nothing to me. I've experienced hunger and cold, watched my only remaining family member die without money for medical treatment, stayed up all night in the fields in the winter just for a few meager wages. Compared to that, their mocking words are as light as dust. Life has long since turned my heart to stone. Education is the last thread that can pull me out of that fate. I absolutely will not give up just because of a few meaningless whispers around me. The first exam after my transfer arrived quickly. For the past month, I had practically lived between the classroom, the library, and my small room in the Fu family's mansion. Every evening, when the whole house was quiet, I would still sit under my desk lamp, working through thick stacks of exam papers. Outside, the city blazed with lights, while inside my room there was only the rustling of paper and the faint scent of ink. I knew I had no way out. Those born into wealth can fail a few times and then get back up again. But for me, just one step back would lead to an abyss. On the day the results were announced, the score sheet, which had just been posted outside the classroom door, immediately caused a stir. First place in class 20, Lin Simon. Not only was I at the top of the class, but my score was also more than 30 points ahead of the second-place student. In some subjects, I even scored higher than the students in the elite class. The whole class looked at me with completely different eyes than before. The laughter that had once echoed around me suddenly vanished. Instead, there was astonishment mixed with disbelief. Du Yung Xia stood before the report card, her face extremely grim. She clutched the paper tightly in her hand, her red-painted fingernails almost digging into her palms. "Just top marks in a rural school," she muttered, biting her lip, as if trying to convince herself. It's just that the test was easy this time. But even she knew that no one could achieve that score by luck alone. That evening, for the first time during dinner, my uncle proactively asked about my report card. "I heard you came first in class this time." I nodded. "Yes." My uncle put down his chopsticks, looked at the report card for a moment, then said indifferently, "Not bad." Those two short words alone were enough to silence the entire table for a few seconds, because he rarely praised anyone before. Fu Yining immediately smiled and continued, "The girl is indeed diligent in her studies. But this is just a small test. It doesn't say much. Studying in a small town means a simpler curriculum. Maybe she only studied a few parts in advance." She spoke gently, picking up food for Yu Yungsha. "Our Yungsha is different. She's more well-rounded. She's excellent at piano, ballet, and foreign languages. Academic achievement isn't the only thing that determines one's future." Yu Yungsha lowered her head and ate silently, but her gaze towards me grew even colder. I didn't pay attention. After that exam, my life continued as usual. Going to school, doing homework, reading, practicing exam questions. I hardly participated in any school activities. During lunch breaks, while the students gathered to talk about new clothes, famous idols, or overseas trips, I just sat in a corner of the library solving math problems. Sometimes, when I looked up from my book, I would see the blue sky outside the large window and involuntarily remember northwest China. I remembered the barren yellow hills, the old mud house where my mother used to sit mending clothes by the oil lamp. Each time, I would lower my head and work on another problem. I wouldn't allow myself to lose heart. A month later was the citywide inter-school exam. This was the real test. On the day the results came out, the whole school practically exploded. A dazzling red honor roll hung right in the middle of the main hall. First place in the entire grade, Lin Simon. Total score, 728. That name was like a large stone thrown into a calm lake, creating a shockwave throughout the school. A student from a regular class, and a female transfer student from the Northwest Mountains at that, had surpassed all the elite students to take first place in the entire grade. Even my homeroom teacher was moved to tears. "Simon, do you know? You're the first regular class student in the past 5 years to reach first place in the entire school." The head of the grade also specifically called me to the office. He looked at the report card, then at me, his expression a mixture of joy and disbelief. "You must maintain this level of performance. With your current results, getting into Tsinghua or Peking University is absolutely within your reach." Tsinghua. Peking University. Those two names were like distant stars in the sky, which I had only dared to gaze at silently from the foot of the mountain before. But now, for the first time, I felt I could truly reach them. When I returned to the Fu family's house with my report card, the atmosphere in the villa changed completely. Fu Wenbei sat on the living room sofa, for the first time not looking at me with disdain. He held my report card and looked at it for a long time before softly saying, "That's impressive." Yu Yungsha slammed her door shut and refused to come down for dinner. Fu Yining maintained her usual gentle smile, but I could see the corners of her lips were tightening. "I didn't expect Simon to be so good at studying," she said softly to her grandfather. "The Fu family's genes are indeed not bad." Her grandfather didn't reply immediately. He held the report card up and stared at it for a long time, his gaze deep and unreadable. After a while, he slowly looked up at me. "You did even better than you said you would." That was the longest sentence he had spoken to me since I first entered this house. My grandmother was so happy that she kept putting food on my plate, her eyes red but full of pride. "Eat more. You're too thin." From that day on, my grandfather's attitude towards me changed dramatically. He allowed me free access to his study. It was a large room filled with the scent of old paper and sandalwood, crammed with rare books and specialized documents I had never seen before. The first time I stepped inside, I was almost speechless. Thick English books, foreign research journals, advanced mathematics textbooks. It all seemed like a huge treasure trove unfolding before my eyes. From that day on, besides school and the library, my grandfather's study became the place where I spent the most time. He would sometimes sit opposite me, reading the newspaper or reviewing work documents, while I bent my head down, solving problems. We didn't talk much, but the atmosphere between us gradually softened. Only Fu Yuning and Yu Yunsha became increasingly uneasy. My presence felt like a thorn in their throats, harder and harder to swallow. Yu Yunsha no longer openly mocked me as before, but began using more subtle methods. One day, I opened my bag and found my textbooks covered in black ink. Another day, after school, I was locked in the dark gym for over an hour. Once, she even secretly smeared superglue on my chair in class. I still didn't resist. If the books were dirty, I cleaned them. If I was locked in, I memorized vocabulary. If the chair was glued, I stood and listened to the lecture for the whole time. The calmer I remained, the more furious Yu Yunxia became. Perhaps she couldn't understand why the tricks that had once made so many girls cry didn't affect me at all. But she didn't know that my life had been through far darker days than that. Those who have walked through the abyss won't be stopped by a few small stones. By the end of the semester, I still held the top position in the entire grade. Not only that, the gap in scores between me and the second-place student was growing even larger. The name Lin Si-man began appearing frequently on the school's honor roll. Teachers mentioned me during meetings, and younger students regarded me as a legendary role model. Some even secretly took photos of my notes and passed them around. The ridicule that had surrounded me before gradually disappeared completely. That's just how people are. When you're weak, they'll laugh at you mercilessly. But when you reach a high enough position, they start looking up to you with admiration. At school, no one dared call me country bumpkin anymore. But at the Fa family's house, the atmosphere became increasingly strange. Fu Yuning was no longer content with just making veiled remarks in front of everyone. She began to directly express her concerns. One evening, while her grandmother was choosing flowers in the living room, Fu Yuning suddenly spoke softly. "Mother, Simon is indeed very intelligent, but don't you think she's too cold?" Her grandmother paused, looking up at her. "She's been back here for quite a while, yet she doesn't make friends with anyone. All she does is study." Fu Yining sighed softly. "I know her past circumstances were difficult, so it's normal for her to be distant. But after all, we're family, and if we continue like this, aren't we just treating ourselves as outsiders?" Her grandmother remained silent. Fu Yining then turned to my uncle, who was reviewing documents beside her. "Brother, I'm really worried about her future. With her current grades, I'm afraid even Tsinghua or Peking University might not be able to keep her. If she goes too far, who knows, when she looks back, she might not even remember the Fu family anymore." She chuckled softly, trying to sound gentle. "Unlike my Yungsha. Although her academic performance is average, she has a pure heart and always considers this place her true home." My uncle finally looked up from his documents. He glanced at Fu Yining for a few seconds before saying indifferently, "Instead of worrying about others flying far away, you should worry about Yunsha's grades first." Fu Yining was stunned. My uncle continued flipping through the documents, his tone calm but incredibly sharp. "She's always near the bottom of the class in every exam. Even if we spend money to send her abroad for studies, she needs to have some ability. Don't let people laugh at the Fu family." Fu Yining's face instantly turned pale. Yu Yunsha, sitting beside her, heard this and her eyes reddened, her grip on her chopsticks tightening. I sat silently eating, as if nothing concerned me. But from that day on, their gazes towards me were completely different. It was no longer just mere dislike, but a genuine sense of danger. In the second semester of 11th grade, the National Mathematical Olympiad began selecting its participating team. The school formed its own team of the best students. Both I and Fa Van Bach were selected. In the team's training room, almost all the students were from the elite class. They automatically divided into small groups to discuss the problems, while I was naturally isolated. Some deliberately hid their materials, while others would immediately change the topic if I approached. But I didn't mind. I was used to being alone. Every day after school, I would sit in the study room until late at night. The incredibly difficult Olympiad problems gave me a strange sense of exhilaration. Each problem was like a complex labyrinth. Each time I found a solution, I felt like I had opened another door to the world. Fu Wenbei often inadvertently walked past my desk. At first, he had his usual disdainful look, but later his gaze became more complex. Once, he stood beside my desk for a long time before suddenly asking, "Aren't you tired?" I didn't look up. "I am." "Then why are you studying so intensely?" I paused for a few seconds before softly saying, "Because besides this, I have nothing else." Fu Wenbei was silent. After a long while, he pulled up a chair and sat down opposite me, placing a stack of documents on the table. National selection exam papers from a few years ago. I photocopied extra. After saying that, he immediately stood up and left, as if he were just throwing away trash, not helping me. I watched her tall, slender figure disappear, then lowered my head and continued working on my assignment. The Olympic finals were held in another province. Before I left, Yu Yunsha stopped me in the school hallway. She crossed her arms, a sarcastic smile on her face. "I heard you're going to take the national exam soon?" I didn't answer, intending to walk past, but she leaned over and blocked my way. "Good luck with your exam." Her voice was artificially sweet. "Who knows? Maybe you'll even bring home a consolation prize for the Fu family." I finally looked up at her. My gaze was so calm that the smile on her face gradually froze. "I've never taken an exam for the Fu family," I said. "I take exams for myself." After saying that, I walked straight past her. A few days later, the results were announced. The whole school went almost crazy. I won the gold medal in the National Mathematical Olympiad, and also made it into the top 60 nationally, earning a spot on the national team. Meanwhile, Fu Wenbei only won a bronze medal. The news spread so quickly that even the principal personally came to my class to find me. He stood on the podium, before the astonished gazes of all the students, and, in a rare display of pride, he smiled. "Lin Seaman is the school's greatest pride this year." Applause erupted, almost shaking the entire classroom. I returned to the Fu family home in the early winter drizzle, clutching the gold medal. In the living room, my grandfather was reading documents. When I placed the velvet box on the table, he silently opened it. Under the soft yellow light, the gold medal reflected a dazzling brilliance. He gazed at it for a long time. Then, for the first time since I met him, the corners of his lips curved slightly. "Excellent." Just those two words, but they silenced the entire room. My grandmother's eyes welled up with tears of joy. She kept pulling me down to eat, constantly putting food on my plate, and stroking my head as if afraid I would disappear. Even my uncle rarely showed such obvious satisfaction. Only Fu Yuning's smile was almost uncontrollable. "Our Wenbei also won a bronze medal," she immediately said, deliberately diverting my attention. The national competition is so difficult. Winning a prize is already very impressive, but this time even my grandmother didn't join in with her. Her eyes, as she looked at me, were filled with undisguised pride. My grandfather, still holding the gold medal in his hand, had a deep, thoughtful gaze that no one could guess. From that moment, I knew I had truly crossed a new boundary within the Fu family. The Olympic gold medal was like an invisible line, silently changing my position in the Fu family. If before I was just a long-lost granddaughter brought back out of a belated sense of guilt, now I had become someone the entire family couldn't afford to underestimate. My uncle began to talk to me more often. Sometimes during dinner, he would mention company projects, or ask me what I thought about the current economic trends. At first, I just listened, but gradually I started offering my opinions. At those times, my grandfather would sit silently beside me, holding a teacup, saying nothing, but his gaze was much more intense than before. I understood they were watching me, observing whether this daughter, raised in the impoverished mountains, truly deserved to bear the Fu family bloodline. And Fu Yuning's sense of danger reached its peak because of this. She could no longer maintain her feigned gentleness. Her gaze towards me grew colder. Like looking at a thorn in the wrong place, the longer it lingered, the deeper it would pierce her flesh. She began to devote all her efforts to Yu Yung-sha. Classes in high-class etiquette, tea ceremony, flower arranging, dancing, piano, socializing. Almost every day, Yu Yung-sha was taken to meet other prestigious young ladies in the social circle. Fu Yining wanted to use what she called the heir of a noble family to compete with me. She believed that no matter how academically gifted I was still just a child who grew up in the mud, forever unable to truly integrate into the world. As for Yu Yung-sha, she was becoming increasingly extreme. Once I opened the door to my room and found her standing next to my desk. In her hand was a notebook containing a compilation of my mistakes, a notebook I had spent months completing. The pages were almost half torn. Hearing the door open, Yu Yung-sha startled and turned around. A look of panic flashed in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by hatred. I quickly stepped forward and grabbed her wrist before she could tear any more pages. "What are you doing?" My voice was so cold that even I felt alienated. That was the first time I had truly lost my temper since entering the Fu family. Yu Yung-sha froze for a few seconds under my gaze, then struggled even more frantically. "Let go!" she screamed. "What are you so proud of? Do you think being good at studying makes you so great? You're a Lin, not a Fu. Everything in this house will belong to me and my brother from now on. You're just an outsider who crawled in." Her eyes were bloodshot with rage, her voice becoming increasingly shrill. "You and your damned mother are both unworthy!" Slap. A resounding slap interrupted her words. The one who delivered it wasn't me. It was Fu Yining. She stood outside the door, her face pale, her chest heaving violently. She had probably heard the argument and rushed over. Yu Yung-sha covered her face, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Mother, what are you saying?" Fu Yining's voice trembled as she shouted. "Apologize to your sister immediately!" Yu Yung-sha froze for a few seconds before bursting into tears. "You clearly thought the same thing," she cried out through her tears. "Everyone's been bewitched by her. Grandpa, Uncle, even Wenbei. Everyone only sees her." Her sobs echoed through the hallway. I released her wrist, bent down to pick up the torn pages on the floor, and gently smoothed them out. Then I stood up and looked directly at the mother and daughter. I never wanted anything from the Fu family. My voice was soft, but each word was clear. What I want, I will take myself. Having said that, I hugged my notebooks and turned to leave. Behind me, Yu Yung-sha's crying grew louder, mixed with Fu Yining's frantic attempts at comforting her. From that day on, the already strained relationship between us was completely torn apart, its last remaining facade shattered. I entered my senior year of high school amidst that suffocating atmosphere. The academic pressure increased, but my grades became even more consistent. In all the inter-school exams at the city and provincial levels, my name was always at the top. Once, I even achieved the highest score in the entire province. The principal and the school administration treated me like a treasure. Every time they saw me, they wore expressions of both expectation and caution, as if afraid that even a slight mistake would ruin the school's future. Then one day, the principal and the head of the department personally came to the Fu family's house. They brought documents and a proposal to transfer my household registration from Northwest China to the city before the college entrance exam. "If the household registration transfer is successful," the principal said seriously, "with Tu Man's current academic achievements, the chances of her becoming the top student in the province are extremely high. This would be a symbolic achievement not only for the school, but also for the entire city." That evening, this topic quickly came up. My uncle was the first to agree. "I think this is very reasonable." He put down his chopsticks and looked at my grandfather. "Just transfer the household registration. The procedure is troublesome, but it's not impossible." My grandmother immediately nodded repeatedly. That's right. Tu Man is so good at studying. We can't let the household registration issue affect her future."
She took my hand, her voice full of love. Don't worry, Grandma will definitely help you.
Before I could say anything, a sudden, jarring sound rang out. Clang! The silver chopsticks fell onto the tiled floor. Fu Yining sprang up from her chair, her face deathly pale. No! Her voice was so sharp it tore through the atmosphere of the dining room. Everyone froze. Fu Yining trembled as she pointed at me. She's surnamed Lin, not Fu. On what basis does she have the right to register her household in the Fu family? Yu Yunxia immediately jumped up, following her mother's lead. That's right, she cried. If we let her register, won't she get a share of everything in this house? Grandpa, do you really want an outsider to steal everything from my mother and me? Grandma, panicked, stood up to intervene. Yining, Yunxia, don't get agitated. This is just about the college entrance exam. The college entrance exam is just an excuse. Fu Yining almost completely lost control. From the moment she entered this house, she's had a purpose. Initially, she pretended to be pitiful to win everyone's favor. Then she deliberately studied hard to stand out. Now her true nature has finally been revealed. She looked at me with eyes full of resentment. She wants to use the college entrance exam to legitimately enter the Fu family. The atmosphere in the dining room was so thick, it felt like it was about to explode. I sat still, silently watching the chaos unfolding before me. My grandfather didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just sat there, his hands clasped together, his gaze heavy and frightening. But I knew very well. The final decision regarding this house had always rested in his hands. After that dinner, the entire Fu family mansion was shrouded in an unprecedented tension. Fu Yining and Yu Yunxia were practically going crazy. The mother and daughter had lost all sense of decorum, crying and arguing, causing chaos throughout the house every day. In the living room, in the dining room, even when guests were present, Fu Yining would tear up and sob, recounting how she had sacrificed her youth for the Fu family, how Yu Yunxia was the granddaughter raised from a young age, and how I was just an outsider who suddenly appeared and gradually stole everything that belonged to her and her mother. She acted very skillfully. So skillfully that if I weren't involved, I might even think I was truly an intruder in this family. Yu Yunxia was even more direct. She often deliberately cried in front of her grandmother, saying that since I appeared, no one cared about her anymore. One day, she even locked herself in her room all day, refusing to eat or drink, causing the maids to frantically run up and down the stairs. My grandmother, who was usually soft-hearted, was visibly thinner from the torment inflicted by the mother and daughter. Only my grandfather remained silent. He didn't take sides, nor did he express a clear stance. But that very silence only made everyone more uneasy. Until one weekend afternoon, things completely spiraled out of control. That day, I was in my room doing practice exams. My headphones were on, and outside the window was the pale sunlight of late autumn. I didn't want to pay attention to the arguments downstairs anymore. But the sounds outside became increasingly chaotic. Crying, shouting, the frantic running of the maids, all mixed together into a jumbled mess. I frowned and took off my headphones. Then, the very next second, a blood-curdling scream startled me, causing me to rush to the window. Looking down at the villa's courtyard, I froze. Fu Yining was pulling Yu Yunxia to the rooftop. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale with agitation. Yu Yunxia was crying so hard she could barely stand, her whole body trembling as she clung tightly to the railing. Downstairs, my grandmother was being supported by the maid, almost collapsing. My uncle stood beside her, his face grim, repeatedly shouting for them to come down. My grandfather stood closest, looking up at the mother and daughter on the rooftop, his face as grim as a stone statue. You want to force me, don't you? Fu Yining's voice echoed through the air, so piercing it sent chills down people's spines. You all want to kill my daughter and me, don't you? She pulled Yu Yunxia closer to the edge of the rooftop, causing her to scream in fear. Fine. If you dare to register Lin Simon's name in the Fu family today, I will jump down with Yunxia immediately. Grandma's sobs were almost heart-wrenching.
Ninin, come down quickly. I agree to everything.
I agree to everything, okay? She wept, her hands trembling as she reached out, as if trying to grasp them from that distant void. My uncle clenched his fists, veins bulging, and snarled each word. Fu Yining, what kind of dignity do you have left? But Fu Yining was completely out of control. Dignity? She laughed bitterly. For all these years, I've done so much for the Fu family, and in the end, it's still not as good as that lost daughter she left behind. As soon as she appeared, everyone changed. Parents only see her. You only see her. Even Wen Bei has started to look down on Yunsha. She almost screamed in despair. Yunsha stood beside her, crying so hard she could barely breathe, her legs weak as if about to collapse. Just as the chaotic atmosphere reached its peak, a lazy voice suddenly came from the second-floor balcony next to me. If you want to jump, then jump. Everyone froze. Fu Wenbei appeared seemingly out of nowhere. He was wearing a black hoodie, one hand holding a can of Coca-Cola, the other in his pocket, his face bored as if watching a ridiculous play. If jumping from there really kills you, he yawned and continued nonchalantly, then it proves you two are truly doomed. Even better. Every time there are exam results, my friends ask if that girl at the bottom of the list is my cousin. How embarrassing. The entire courtyard fell silent. Yu Yongsha was stunned. Fu Yining was also speechless. Even her grandmother stared at Fu Wenbei, unable to believe he could say such things. Only Fa Van Bach remained calmly standing there, sipping his Coca-Cola, his expression so cold it was almost cruel. If you want to threaten someone with suicide, you at least need to have real guts. What are you doing standing there for half a day? Aren't you bothered? Fa Van Bach, my cousin angrily shouted. Get back to your room! Fa Van Bach shrugged, not bothering to argue. He put on his headphones and turned to leave, lazily throwing back a remark before departing. So noisy. The chaotic scene finally ended after more than an hour. Fu Yining and Yu Yongsha were helped downstairs by the maid. The mother and daughter hugged each other, sobbing as if they had suffered a great injustice. The grandmother was so exhausted she almost fainted and had to take heart medication to stabilize herself. The grandfather remained silent throughout. That evening, the entire dinner table was shrouded in a suffocatingly heavy atmosphere. No one dared to speak first, until the grandfather put down his chopsticks. The sound was very light, but it instantly made everyone tense. He raised his head and slowly said, "The matter of transferring the household registration." "Stop here." No more transfer. As soon as he finished speaking, Fu Yuning immediately lowered her head to hide the obvious joy on her face. Yu Yongsha almost breathed a sigh of relief. My grandmother parted her lips as if to say something, but ultimately just silently bowed her head and wiped away her tears. My uncle frowned, about to object, but seeing my grandfather's cold gaze, he remained silent. And me? From beginning to end, I just ate my meal in silence. I wasn't surprised by this outcome at all. In my grandfather's eyes, no matter how outstanding I was, the Fu family was still more important than anything else. Between the stability of the family and a long-lost granddaughter who had returned less than 2 years ago, his choice was clear from the start. That night, as I was working on my assignments in my room, the maid suddenly knocked on the door. "The master requests your presence in the study." I paused slightly, then put down my pen. In the study, only a single soft yellow desk lamp was lit. The light shone on my grandfather's face, making the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes even deeper. He sat behind his desk, gesturing for me to sit opposite him. "I'm afraid I've affected you today." His voice was much lower than usual. I didn't reply, just silently looked at him. He was silent for a long time before continuing. "The matter of the household registration, the situation is rather unusual. But don't worry, the college entrance exam will be arranged smoothly. The Fu family will prepare accommodation, transportation, and everything you need." He paused for a few seconds, then looked directly at me. "University tuition, living expenses afterward, even if you want to study abroad or pursue a master's or doctoral degree. The Fu family will take care of it all. His eyes were deep. It was as if this was the greatest concession he could make, using money to compensate for the emotional things he couldn't give me. I listened silently, then gently shook my head. Thank you, Grandpa. But it's not necessary. Grandpa was taken aback. I took a small notebook from my bag and gently placed it on the table in front of him. What is this? It's the total cost from the day I come to the Fu family, I said calmly. Food, lodging, clothes, books. Everything I remember is written in this notebook. Grandfather looked at the notebook for a long time before slowly raising his head. You've always kept these things? Yes. I looked him straight in the eye. I said it from the beginning. I didn't come back here to find relatives. I just wanted to study. Now that goal is almost achieved. My throat tightened slightly, but I tried to keep my voice calm. I will repay everything the Fu family gave me later. Grandfather's eyes flickered slightly. I bowed my head very gently. And my maternal grandfather. In my mother's heart and in my heart, there is only one person. His surname is Lin. After I finished speaking, the study fell silent. The soft yellow light fell on the mahogany table, casting a long shadow of my grandfather on the cold floor. He sat there silently, his hand resting on the small notebook I had given him, not speaking a word for a long time. I saw his fingertips tremble slightly. A man who had spent his life in a position of authority, accustomed to giving orders and deciding the fate of others, now seemed to have aged considerably. He slowly opened the notebook. Each page was neatly written in my handwriting. Every day I bought books. How much did my tutoring cost? How much for my uniform? How much for my plane ticket? Even the things my grandmother secretly slipped into my room, I tried to look up the prices and record them all. Not a single expense was missed. My grandfather looked at the long list of numbers for a long time, finally closing the notebook. You. He opened his mouth, his voice hoarser than usual. Have you ever thought about staying? I paused slightly. He looked at me, his gaze so complex it was hard to describe. Staying at the Fu family's house. Truly becoming part of the family. I was silent for a few seconds, then gently shook my head. I don't belong here. I spoke softly, but each word was clear. I knew that from the beginning. The Fu family gave me the opportunity to step out and see the world, and I am very grateful. But I don't want to depend on anyone. I want to forge my own future. My grandfather's eyes flickered slightly. He looked at me for a long time, as if wanting to say something but ultimately unable to utter a word. I stood up and bowed to him. It's getting late. I'll go back to my room to study. This time he didn't stop me. As I reached the door, his voice suddenly rang out softly behind me. Simon? I stopped. Grandpa? My grandfather paused for a long time before continuing. I owe your mother. My back stiffened slightly. But in the end, I didn't turn around, because I knew that the person who truly wanted to hear that apology was no longer there. Since that conversation, a strange peace had settled over the Fu family mansion. Fani Nin and Zhu Vanha stopped making a fuss. Perhaps it was because their goal had been achieved, or perhaps because they understood that as long as I was still here, my grandfather wouldn't completely abandon me. But an invisible distance had appeared between us, a thin layer of ice that seemed stable but would shatter with the slightest touch. I continued attending school as usual. I still topped the inter-school exams. I was still the student the whole school considered the greatest hope for that year's college entrance exam. My days were almost completely filled with exams, lectures, and stacks of study materials reaching up to my chest. I no longer paid attention to anything else, because I knew very well. The college entrance exam was the real battle. The days flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was the day before I left for Northwest Vietnam to take the exam. That morning, the city sky was a pale gray. The early summer air was slightly humid, but still retained a lingering chill of spring. The gate of the villa was unusually crowded. The maid stood beside the car carrying luggage. Grandma stood on the steps, leaning on her cane, her eyes red as if she had cried all night. Even Fa von Bach, uncharacteristically early, was lazily leaning against the car door, drinking coffee. Only Grandpa wasn't present. Fongy Nin was the first to arrive. She carried a very large gift bag filled with expensive sweets and local delicacies. Siman, her voice was perfectly gentle. Auntie prepared some things for you to take back to your hometown. After all, the people there have taken care of you for so many years. Consider it a small token of appreciation from the Fu family. I looked at the gift bag, then at her. Her gaze remained as cold as ever. I understood. This wasn't concern. It was just a reminder that I belonged somewhere else. Before I could speak, Yu Yung-sha crossed her arms and smirked behind me. Sister Seaman, remember to keep your spirits up. You've been a top student for so long. It would be ridiculous if you failed the college entrance exam. Her voice was full of malice. But before I could reply, another voice interrupted. Worry about yourself first. Fu Wenbei walked over, his usual dejected expression. What score did you get on the most recent mock exam? With that kind of score, even if someone offered to send you abroad for studies, they'd have to think twice. Don't end up becoming a good-for-nothing. Fu Wenbei! Yu Yongxia's face flushed with anger, but he didn't bother to pay attention. He simply pulled a black fountain pen from his pocket and offered it to me. Take it. I was slightly taken aback. That's my lucky charm. He turned his face away, his voice still defiant. I've used it since I was a child. Out of respect for you, you're reluctantly my rival. I'll lend it to you for now. I looked at the slightly worn pen in his hand. It was clearly very well preserved. After a moment, I reached out and took it. Thank you. Fu Wenbei snorted softly. Do well on the exam. I'm looking forward to seeing you again at Tsinghua or Peking University to continue the competition. For the first time, I looked at him for a long time before nodding slightly. Okay. My grandmother, leaning on her cane, came forward and hugged me. Her body was very thin, trembling as if a strong gust of wind could knock her over. Siman, her voice choked. You must come home after the exam. Grandma has already told the kitchen to prepare lots of your favorite dishes. I must definitely come back. I let her hug me, silently patting her back. But in the end, I didn't promise anything. Because even I didn't know whether I would ever return here after this exam. The car left the city before dawn. The skyscrapers behind us gradually faded into the distance, the dazzling neon lights slowly disappearing into the early morning mist. I sat by the window, silently watching the scenery outside change little by little. From bustling avenues to endless fields, from brightly lit urban areas to the undulating gray-blue mountains on the horizon. The road became increasingly desolate as we traveled west. The ground began to turn its familiar, dry, yellowish hue. The wind, carrying dust, lashed against the car windows just like childhood memories that remained deeply embedded within me. I knew I was almost home. Throughout the long journey, my uncle hardly spoke. He only occasionally asked how my studies were going, if I was missing any materials, or reminded me of the exam schedule. Compared to the coldness I displayed when I first entered the Fa family's house, his attitude had softened considerably. At least, he truly treated me like family now. The car didn't drive straight into town, but turned onto a small dirt road leading up the western hillside. I looked at the scenery outside the window and clenched my fists slightly. That was where my mother was buried. He told the driver to wait at the foot of the hill, while he silently followed me up, step by step. The dirt road was still as rough as before. Weeds grew on both sides, swaying in the wind. In the distance, the sky stretched endlessly, seemingly empty. My mother's grave lay on a small mound. Very simple. No fancy headstone, no expensive flowers, just an old tombstone inscribed with the words, Lam Mai. Dust covered the base of the grave. I squatted down, silently brushing away the yellow sand clinging to the tombstone. My uncle stood behind me, lighting a cigarette. The smoke drifted lazily in the mountain breeze. He smoked for a long time before speaking in a hoarse voice. That year, When the repatriation movement began, the policy was very strict. Our family tried everything, but we still couldn't get another quota to bring people back. He paused for a few seconds before continuing. Then he fell seriously ill again. He had a high fever for several days and almost didn't make it. His grandparents were almost driven mad at the time. There was no other way. They could only take him back to the city for treatment, and then plan to come back later to get his sister. The wind on the hill blew harder. I listened in silence. But when they returned, the village had been swept away by the flood. His voice was hoarse. The dead were scattered everywhere. They searched for a long time. Searched every county, every village. They spent a lot of money, asked many people for help. But they still couldn't find his mother. He bowed his head and gave a bitter smile. In those years, almost no one in the Fu family smiled anymore. My grandmother cried every day. My grandfather became increasingly taciturn. Later, when Fu Yining's father passed away, he entrusted her to our care before he died. She was very young then. Thin, frail, and her eyes resembled her mother's in some ways. He took a deep drag of his cigarette and slowly exhaled. When her grandparents saw her, it was like seeing a final comfort. Gradually, they transferred all their regrets and affection for her mother onto Fu Yining. So long that even they themselves couldn't distinguish whose feelings they were for anymore. The smoke dissipated in the wind. The sky in the northwest was a desolate blue. I bowed my head, looking at the name on the tombstone, my heart strangely calm. Perhaps it was because I had long understood that there is no absolute right or wrong in this world. It's just that time is too cruel. My uncle was silent for a long time before looking at me. Simon, your grandparents actually never wanted to abandon your mother. After hearing the news of her death, your maternal grandmother was bedridden for half a year, and your maternal grandfather locked himself in his study for 3 days and 3 nights. When he came out, he only said one sentence. He paused, his voice noticeably hoarse. Even if it was just a handful of ashes, he would still go and bring his daughter home himself. After hearing this, I only lowered my eyes slightly, and I gently pointed to a small mound of earth not far away. There was a lower, older tombstone there, almost completely overgrown with weeds. That's my maternal grandfather, I whispered. The one who truly raised my mother. Before she died, my mother said she wanted to be buried next to him. She said, "This is her home." My uncle stood silently. I looked at the 2 graves side by side in the desolate yellow land, a bitter feeling welling up inside me. My mother never resented the Fu family. If she had, she wouldn't have kept that old photograph of them for so many years. If she had resented, she wouldn't have held me close and gently told me that I had to go see the world in her place. But in the end, the person she truly considered family was still my maternal grandfather, Lin, buried in this very land. I slowly knelt before my mother's grave. The wind blew through my long hair. Mom, I'm about to take the college entrance exam. I'll try my best. I'll definitely go far. Go for both of us, Mom. My voice was very soft. So soft it almost dissolved into the wind. Then I stood up, brushed the dust off my knees, and turned to my uncle. Let's go. I didn't look back again. Behind me, the 2 graves still lay silently amidst the vast expanse of the northwest. Quiet. Lonely. But it brings a strange sense of peace to my heart. I know, no matter how far the future may take me, no matter how vast the world I enter, my roots remain in this land. It will always remind me who I am. And it will always remind me that only when a person stands firm on their own abilities can they truly go far. My future only officially begins now.